My name is Ahmed Al-Rashid. I am 32 years old, and on April 18th, 2015, I died for 9 minutes after being burned alive by ISIS militants in Mosul, Iraq. I was a former devout Muslim, the son of a mosque leader, and had memorized large portions of the Quran. What I experienced in those 9 minutes in eternity changed everything I believed about God, salvation, and who Jesus really is. I was born and raised in the ancient city of Mosul, Iraq, in a family where Islam was not just a religion, but the very foundation of our identity and daily existence. My father, Hassan al-Rashid, had served as the assistant imam at our neighborhood mosque for 25 years, and our family lineage could be traced back through generations of Islamic scholars and religious leaders. From my earliest memories, the call to prayer echoing 5 times a day from the minaret near our home was as natural and essential as breathing. My childhood was immersed in Islamic learning and practice. By the age of 12, I had memorized 15 complete chapters of the Quran, which my father and the community considered a remarkable achievement that indicated Allah's special favor upon our family. Every morning before school, I would sit with my father in our courtyard, reciting verses in Arabic while he corrected my pronunciation and explained the deeper meanings of the text. These moments with him were among the most precious of my young life, as I felt connected not only to my earthly father, but to the long tradition of faithful Muslims who had preserved these sacred words for over 14 centuries. Our daily routine revolved entirely around Islamic obligations. We performed the 5 prescribed prayers at their appointed times without exception, even if it meant interrupting work, meals, or social activities. During Ramadan, our family observed the fast with strict devotion, and I learned to find spiritual strength in the discipline of denying physical desires for the sake of drawing closer to Allah. My mother would wake before dawn to prepare suhoor, our pre-fast meal, and we would break our fast each evening with dates and prayer, following the example of the Prophet Muhammad. From an early age, I was taught that Christians were fundamentally misguided people who had corrupted the original message that Allah had revealed through the Prophet Isa, whom they called Jesus. My father explained that while Isa was indeed a great prophet, Christians had committed the unforgivable sin of shirk by claiming he was the Son of God and worshipping him as divine. The concept of the Trinity was presented to me as the ultimate blasphemy, making God into 3 entities, when Islam's most fundamental principle was the absolute oneness of Allah. I grew up believing that Christians had deliberately changed their scriptures to support false doctrines, that they worshipped 3 gods instead of 1, and that their religion was a corruption of the pure monotheism that Allah had revealed through Islam. When I encountered Christians in Mosul, I viewed them with a mixture of pity and suspicion, seeing them as spiritually deceived people who needed to be guided toward the truth of Islam. When ISIS began taking control of territories across Iraq and Syria in 2014, many people in our community initially viewed their arrival with cautious optimism. Finally, we thought there would be leaders who would implement pure Islamic law and create a society based entirely on Quranic principles. My father and I attended early meetings where ISIS representatives spoke about establishing a true Islamic caliphate, and their knowledge of Islamic jurisprudence and their apparent devotion to strict religious observance impressed many of us. I was 29 years old when ISIS took control of Mosul, and like many young Muslim men in the city, I initially supported their stated goal of creating a society governed entirely by Islamic law. The idea of living under pure Sharia, without the corruption and Western influence that we believed had weakened Muslim countries, appealed to my desire for authentic Islamic governance. I participated in community discussions about implementing proper Islamic education, establishing religious courts, and creating economic systems based on Islamic principles. However, as months passed under ISIS rule, I began to witness things that deeply troubled my conscience, even though I tried to justify them through my understanding of Islamic law. The public executions became frequent and increasingly brutal, with men, women, and even elderly people being killed for infractions that seemed minor or based on flimsy evidence. I watched neighbors and friends disappear in the night, accused of various crimes against the Islamic State, and many of them were never seen again. What disturbed me most was the treatment of Christians in our city. These were people I had known my entire life, families who had lived peacefully in Mosul for generations, suddenly being forced to convert to Islam, pay impossible taxes, or flee their homes with nothing but the clothes on their backs. I had been taught that Islam protected people of the book, yet I saw Christian children crying as their families were driven from homes that had been in their families for decades. You know when your heart tells you something is wrong, even when your mind has been taught it's right? That's where I found myself during those months under ISIS control. My Islamic education told me that these actions were justified because they were creating a pure Islamic society, but something deep inside me recoiled from the suffering I witnessed daily. The turning point in my thinking came when I observed how Christians faced persecution and even death. I had expected to see them curse their persecutors, demand revenge, or renounce their faith to save their lives. Instead, I witnessed something that shook me to my core. I saw Christians forgiving the very people who were destroying their lives. I watched elderly Christian men pray for the ISIS militants who were forcing them from their homes. I heard Christian mothers telling their children not to hate the Muslims who had taken everything from them. This response made no sense according to everything I had been taught about human nature and religious conviction. If their faith was false, as I believed, why were they willing to die for it? If they were truly deceived by corrupt doctrine, why did their forgiveness seem more authentic than the righteous anger of those who claimed to be defending true religion? These questions began eating away at my certainty about the righteousness of what was happening in our city. Gradually, almost without conscious decision, I began finding small ways to help Christian families who were suffering under ISIS rule. I would warn them about planned raids on their neighborhoods, provide them with food and water when they were hiding, and help them find safe places to stay temporarily. At first, I justified this compassion as simply helping fellow human beings in distress, which Islam certainly encouraged. But as time went on, I realized that my actions were motivated by something deeper than general humanitarian concern. These Christians possessed a peace and forgiveness that I had never seen in the lives of even the most devout Muslims I knew, including myself. The morning of April 18, 2015 began like any other day under ISIS rule in Mosul. I performed my Fajr prayers before dawn, as I had done faithfully for over 20 years, reciting the familiar Arabic verses while facing toward Mecca. My father and I shared breakfast together, discussing plans for helping to distribute food supplies to families in our neighborhood who were struggling under the harsh economic conditions that had developed since ISIS took control of the city. Around 10 o'clock that morning, I was preparing to visit the Khalil family, elderly Christians who had been hiding in their basement for 3 weeks after receiving threats from ISIS militants. I had been bringing them bread and water every few days, along with news about which areas of the city were currently safe for movement. They had become like grandparents to me, and their quiet faith and gentle gratitude for my small acts of kindness had touched something deep in my heart. I was gathering supplies in a cloth bag when I heard the sound of heavy boots approaching our front door, followed by loud, aggressive pounding. Before my father could reach the entrance, the door burst open and 6 ISIS militants in black clothing and face coverings stormed into our home. Their leader, a young man with cold eyes and a thick beard, immediately demanded to know where Ahmed al-Rashid could be found. "I am Ahmed," I said, stepping forward while trying to keep my voice steady, despite the fear that was rising in my chest. "What do you want with me?" The militant leader pulled out a piece of paper and began reading from it in a formal tone. "Ahmed al-Rashid, son of Hassan al-Rashid, you are accused of converting to Christianity and providing aid to enemies of the Islamic State. Multiple witnesses have reported that you have been helping Christians evade justice and undermining the authority of the caliphate." My father's face went white with shock and horror. "This is impossible," he protested. "My son is a devout Muslim. He has memorized the Quran. He prays 5 times a day. Someone has made a terrible mistake." I knew immediately who had reported me. Karim, a neighbor who had harbored resentment toward our family for years because of my father's position at the mosque, had clearly been watching my movements and had seen me bringing supplies to Christian families. The irony was bitter. I had been accused of converting to Christianity when I was still a practicing Muslim, albeit one whose faith was being shaken by the contradictions I witnessed daily. "Is this true?" the militant demanded, staring directly into my eyes. "Have you been helping Christians escape the justice of Allah?" In that moment, I faced a choice that would determine not only my immediate fate, but the trajectory of my eternal soul. I could deny the accusations and possibly save my life, or I could acknowledge that I had indeed been helping suffering families, regardless of their religious beliefs. Something inside me refused to lie, even to save myself. "I have been helping families in need," I said carefully. "The Quran teaches us to show mercy to those who are suffering. I gave them food and water because they were hungry and thirsty, just as any Muslim should do for fellow human beings in distress." The militant leader's expression hardened. "You gave aid to enemies of the Islamic State. You warned them about our operations. You helped them evade the justice that Allah has decreed for those who reject His true religion. This makes you a traitor to Islam and to the Caliphate." They bound my hands behind my back with rough rope that immediately began cutting into my wrists. My father fell to his knees, begging them to reconsider, reminding them of his decades of faithful service to the mosque and to the Islamic community. He offered to pay any fine, to guarantee my future behavior, to do whatever was necessary to secure my release. "Your son has committed apostasy," the leader replied coldly. "The penalty is death, and it must be carried out publicly as a warning to others who might consider betraying their faith." As they dragged me from my family home, I could hear my mother crying and my father continuing to plead for my life. The sound of their anguish was almost worse than my own fear about what was coming. I had never intended for my simple acts of compassion to bring such catastrophic consequences to my family, yet I could not bring myself to regret helping families who were suffering. The militants forced me to walk through the streets of Mosul toward the central square, where public executions had become a regular occurrence. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood about what was happening, and people began gathering along the route. Some out of curiosity, others because attendance at such events had become essentially mandatory under ISIS rule. When we reached the square, hundreds of people had already assembled, including many whom I recognized from my childhood and youth. Some looked at me with pity, others with anger at my alleged betrayal of Islam, and still others with the blank expressions of people who had witnessed too much violence and had learned to numb themselves to the suffering of others. The militants forced me to kneel in the center of the square, while one of them read aloud a formal declaration of my crimes and the sentence that had been imposed. The charges included providing aid to Christians, warning enemies of the Islamic State about planned operations, and undermining the religious authority of the Caliphate through my actions. "Do you have any final words?" the leader asked. Will you repent of your crimes and ask Allah for forgiveness? I looked out at the crowd of faces, many of whom had known me since I was a child. In that moment, I realized that I could not and would not deny that I had helped suffering families, even if those families were Christians. Whatever punishment awaited me, I would face it with the knowledge that I had chosen compassion over religious hatred. I helped families who were hungry and afraid, I said in a voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. If showing mercy to suffering people is a crime, then I am guilty. But I believe Allah is merciful and would want His followers to show mercy to others. The militants had prepared a large metal cage in the center of the square, and they forced me inside before securing the door with chains. Then they began dousing the cage and my clothing with gasoline, the sharp chemical smell overwhelming my senses and making me dizzy with fear about what was coming. The crowd around the square began chanting, Allahu Akbar, as the militants prepared to light the fire. Some people were covering their children's eyes, while others were holding up cell phone cameras to record the execution for propaganda purposes. When the flames ignited, the pain was beyond anything I had ever imagined possible. Fire consumed my clothing instantly and began burning my skin and flesh with an agony that felt like every nerve ending in my body was being attacked simultaneously. I tried to recite verses from the Quran, but the superheated air seared my lungs and throat, making speech impossible. The smell of my own burning flesh mixed with the gasoline fumes created a nauseating combination that would have made me vomit if I had been capable of any response other than pure survival instinct. The crowd's chanting became a distant roar as my hearing began to fail, and my vision blurred as the intense heat damaged my eyes. I could feel my heartbeat becoming irregular as my body went into shock from the trauma and pain. My last coherent thought was a prayer. Allah, if this is truly your will, receive my soul and forgive whatever sins I may have committed. Then the world went completely dark, and the excruciating pain finally ended in absolute silence. The next moment of awareness came with the startling realization that I was floating above the scene in the town square, looking down at my own burning body, still trapped within the metal cage. The flames continued to consume what had been my physical form, but I felt no pain, no heat, no connection to the charred remains below. Instead, I experienced a strange sense of detachment, as if I was watching someone else's execution rather than my own. The crowd around the square was beginning to disperse, their bloodlust satisfied by the spectacle they had witnessed. Some were taking photographs with their phones. Others were discussing what they had seen with the casual tone of people who had become accustomed to public violence. The ISIS militants were already preparing to leave, their duty completed according to their interpretation of Islamic justice. I tried to call out to the people below to let them know that I was somehow still conscious and aware, but no sound emerged from whatever form I now possessed. When I attempted to touch the shoulder of a man I recognized from our neighborhood, my hand passed through him as if I was made of air. The shock of this realization filled me with a confusion that was almost as overwhelming as the physical agony I had just endured. According to everything I had been taught about Islamic theology, this should have been the moment when the angels Munkar and Nakir appeared to question me about my faith and deeds. I should have been taken to the Barzakh, the intermediate realm where souls await the day of judgment, to be examined about my beliefs and my adherence to Islamic law. Instead, I found myself suspended in this strange state of consciousness, watching my earthly life end while feeling completely alone and abandoned. As I struggled to understand what was happening to me, I suddenly felt a powerful force beginning to pull me away from the scene of my execution. It was not a physical sensation exactly, but rather like being drawn by an irresistible current that I had no ability to resist. The square, the crowd, the burning cage, all began to fade from view as I was transported through what appeared to be empty space. The movement accelerated until I was traveling at impossible speed through absolute darkness. This was not merely the absence of light, but a profound emptiness that seemed to swallow all hope, all warmth, all possibility of comfort or peace. The darkness was so complete that I could not tell if I was moving up, down, or sideways through this void. There were no reference points, no landmarks, just endless black nothingness stretching in every direction. As I continued moving through this terrible emptiness, I became aware of sounds in the distance that gradually grew clearer and more distinct. There were voices, but not speaking in any language I could understand. Some sounded like weeping and wailing, others like screams of anguish and despair. The sounds carried a quality of hopelessness that penetrated my soul and filled me with a dread unlike anything I had ever experienced during my earthly life. The voices seemed to be coming from all directions, creating a chorus of suffering that surrounded me as I continued my journey through the darkness. Some of the voices were calling out what sounded like names, as if they were searching for loved ones who would never answer. Others were making sounds that seemed like pleas for mercy or forgiveness, but there was no response to their desperate cries. As I listened to this symphony of despair, I began to make out words in Arabic among the other voices. I heard someone crying, "I followed the prayers, I followed the law, why am I here?" Another voice was repeating, "I was faithful, I was obedient, where is Allah's mercy?" These were clearly the voices of Muslims who, like me, had expected their religious devotion to guarantee them a place in paradise, yet found themselves in this realm of darkness and abandonment. The realization that devoted Muslims could end up in this place of torment shook me to my core. If following Islamic law and performing religious obligations did not ensure salvation, then what did? Everything I had been taught about earning God's favor through good deeds and proper worship suddenly seemed uncertain and inadequate. Then I became aware of other presences in the darkness, entities that were moving toward me with malevolent intent. I could not see them clearly, but I could sense their hatred and their desire to claim me as their own. Their voices began whispering accusations that cut through my soul like knives. "You betrayed your faith," they hissed. "You helped the enemies of Allah. You abandoned Islam for the corruption of Christianity. You deserve to be here with us forever." The condemnation in their voices was relentless and overwhelming. They recounted every moment when I had helped Christian families, every time I had questioned the violence being carried out in the name of Islam, every doubt I had entertained about the righteousness of ISIS actions. According to them, my compassion had been treachery, my mercy had been weakness, and my questions had been apostasy. "You thought your good intentions would save you," they continued. "You thought Allah would reward you for showing kindness to His enemies, but you chose them over your own faith, and now you belong to us." The spiritual oppression I felt in their presence was crushing. All the guilt, fear, and uncertainty that I had carried during my final months in Mosul came flooding back with multiplied intensity. Had I truly betrayed my faith by helping Christians? Had my growing doubts about ISIS really constituted apostasy against Islam? Was this darkness my eternal punishment for choosing compassion over religious loyalty? Have you ever felt that moment when everything you believed might be wrong? When the foundation of your whole worldview starts cracking beneath your feet? That's exactly where I found myself in that spiritual darkness. 29 years of Islamic faith, of daily prayers and Quranic study, of trying to live according to religious law. And yet here I was, surrounded by condemnation and despair. The dark entities continued their psychological assault, reminding me of every failure, every moment of pride, every time I had judged others or felt superior because of my religious knowledge. They painted a picture of my life that made me seem worthy of nothing but punishment and rejection. According to their accusations, my entire existence had been a series of spiritual failures disguised as religious devotion. But just as I was beginning to accept their condemnation as my deserved fate, something extraordinary happened that changed everything. A light appeared in the distance, cutting through the absolute darkness like a sword of pure radiance. This was not ordinary light like sunlight or electric illumination. This light was alive, pulsing with energy, love, and holiness that I could feel even from far away. The moment this light appeared, the dark entities that had been tormenting me fled immediately, as if they could not bear to remain in its presence. Their accusations and condemnations were silenced instantly, replaced by a peace that began flowing through my soul like healing water. The oppressive spiritual atmosphere that had been crushing me lifted, and for the first time since my death, I felt hope. As the light drew closer, I heard a voice calling my name with infinite tenderness and love. "Ahmed, my beloved son," the voice said, and immediately I knew that this voice knew everything about me. Not just my name and my recent actions, but my every thought, every motivation, every moment of joy and sorrow that had marked my existence. Yet there was no condemnation in that voice, only love and acceptance that overwhelmed my understanding. After the accusations of the dark entities, this welcome felt like being embraced by perfect love itself. The voice continued, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. Come to me and find the peace your soul has been seeking." As I drew closer to the magnificent light, I began to make out a figure within the radiance that took my breath away. It was a man with Middle Eastern features, similar to my own, wearing robes of the purest white that seemed to glow with inner light. His hands bore unmistakable scars from crucifixion, and his feet showed the same marks of the nails that had pierced them. The moment I saw those scars, I knew with absolute certainty who was standing before me. This was Jesus Christ, the one Muslims call Isa al-Masih, but I was seeing him in a way that shattered every theological framework I had been taught. This was not the limited prophet that Islamic teaching had described, nor the defeated figure that I had been told Christians wrongly worshipped. This was the most powerful, most loving, most divine being I had ever encountered. The presence of holiness around him was so intense that I felt my own sinfulness with painful clarity, yet at the same time I experienced complete safety and acceptance in his presence. "This cannot be," I stammered, though I was not sure whether I was speaking aloud or simply thinking desperately. "You are Isa al-Masih, but the Quran teaches that you were only a prophet sent by Allah. You did not die on a cross for sins. You did not rise from the dead. Christians have corrupted your true message and made you into something you never claimed to be." Jesus looked at me with eyes that held infinite compassion and understanding. There was no anger or irritation at my theological confusion, no impatience with my resistance to accepting what I was seeing. Instead, his gaze conveyed a love so pure and patient that it brought tears to my eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of ultimate truth, yet it was gentle and kind. "Ahmed, my beloved son," he said, "I am much more than your teachers told you. You have been faithful to the light you were given, but there is more light to receive. Your heart was sincere in its devotion to God, but your understanding was incomplete." The love in his voice was unlike anything I had ever experienced. This was not the distant, demanding deity that I had spent my life trying to appease through ritual prayers and good deeds. This was perfect love reaching toward me personally, intimately, with a knowledge of my heart that surpassed anything I had ever imagined possible. Something deep within my soul recognized him and began responding with a longing I had never known existed. Jesus raised his scarred hand, and suddenly scenes from my life began to play out around us like moving pictures suspended in the spiritual realm. I watched myself as a young boy learning to recite the Quran with my father, filled with genuine desire to know and serve God. I saw my teenage years spent in the mosque, participating in prayers and religious discussions with sincere devotion. I witnessed my wedding day, the birth of my children, moments of joy and celebration that had marked my earthly existence. But then the scenes shifted to show me moments that were more difficult to observe. I saw times when I had been prideful about my religious knowledge, looking down on Muslims who were less educated or devout than myself. I witnessed instances when I had felt superior because of my ability to memorize Quranic verses or my father's position at the mosque. I watched myself speaking harshly about Christians, calling them misguided and corrupted without really knowing any of them personally. Yet mixed throughout these displays of human pride and prejudice were moments that brought tears to my eyes. I saw myself helping elderly neighbors carry heavy groceries, sharing our family's food with refugees who had even less than we did, and comforting children who were frightened by the sounds of war. I watched the recent months when I had risked my life to help Christian families, not because I agreed with their theology, but because they were human beings who were suffering. I see it now, I whispered, my heart breaking with recognition of the contradictions in my life. I tried to serve Allah through religious observance, but I often served my own pride instead. I condemned Christians for theological errors while harboring hatred and prejudice in my own heart. Jesus nodded with understanding that held no condemnation, only infinite patience with my spiritual blindness. You served the God you knew, Ahmed, but there was more to know about his heart. You tried to earn his love through religious performance, but his love was already reaching toward you before you ever sought him. He gestured, and suddenly I saw visions that completely revolutionized my understanding of God's plan for humanity. I watched Jesus hanging on a cross, but now I comprehended that this was not the defeat of a failed prophet, as I had been taught. This was the Son of God voluntarily taking upon himself the punishment that my sins and the sins of all humanity deserved. The crucifixion was not a tragic mistake, but the ultimate expression of divine love. This was for you, Ahmed, Jesus said, as the vision continued. Every moment of agony I endured on that cross was because I love you personally. I took your pride, your prejudice, your spiritual failures, your hatred toward Christians, and I paid the price for all of it so that you could be forgiven and reconciled to the Father. The weight of this revelation brought me to my knees before him. I had spent my entire life trying to earn God's approval through good deeds and religious devotion, never understanding that the price for my failures had already been paid by someone else. The grace being offered to me was completely undeserved and impossible to earn, yet it was being freely given out of pure love. I died for you too, Ahmed, Jesus continued. My love is not bound by religion or nationality or the theological frameworks that human beings create. It is eternal and unconditional. You helped my people when they were being persecuted, and I was there with you in every act of compassion you showed. Then I saw the empty tomb. The resurrection that I had been taught was a Christian fabrication invented to support false doctrine. But now I understood that death could not hold the Son of God, because love is stronger than death. Life is more powerful than destruction, and truth will always triumph over deception and human misunderstanding. You are not just a prophet, I said, my voice filled with wonder and surrender. You are the Son of God. You died for sins and rose from the dead. Everything I was taught about you was incomplete. Jesus stepped closer and placed his scarred hand on my shoulder. The touch sent waves of love, acceptance, and peace through my entire being. Ahmed, you understand correctly now. I am the way to the Father, the truth you have been seeking, and the life that your soul has been hungry for without even knowing it. I thought religion could save me, but only a relationship with Jesus gave me life. For 29 years, I had been trying to build a bridge to God through good deeds, religious observance, and theological correctness. But Jesus was the bridge that had already been built for me, spanning the gap between my failures and God's perfect holiness. He gestured around us, and I saw a realm of indescribable beauty, filled with people from every nation and background. What amazed me most was seeing Christians who had been killed by ISIS, including some whose persecution I had witnessed in Mosul. They were filled with joy and peace, showing no anger or desire for revenge against those who had martyred them. This is impossible, I said. These people should hate Muslims for what was done to them. Why do they show no hatred? Jesus smiled with infinite love. Because they understand what you are learning now. Love is stronger than hatred. Forgiveness is more powerful than revenge. And my grace is big enough to cover every sin, including the sins of those who persecuted them. Some of these martyred Christians approached me with open arms, welcoming me with the same love that Jesus had shown. There was no condemnation for my past prejudices, no anger about my previous beliefs about Christianity, only joy that I had discovered the truth that had sustained them through their suffering and death. We forgave our killers, one of them told me, because Jesus first forgave us. We prayed for them even as they took our lives, hoping that someday they too would meet him and experience this same love. The magnitude of such forgiveness overwhelmed me completely. These people had discovered a love so powerful that it could overcome even the ultimate injustice of martyrdom. This was the love that Jesus was offering to me, the same love that was available to every person who had ever lived, regardless of their religious background or the magnitude of their failures. Ask yourself this question: what if everything you've been taught about earning God's approval is incomplete? What if the love you've been seeking through religious performance has been freely offered all along, waiting for you to simply receive it? As the overwhelming reality of Jesus' love continued to wash over me, I felt a peace and joy that made me never want to leave this place. The paradise I was experiencing, this perfect acceptance and freedom from all the spiritual burdens I had carried my entire life, was everything my soul had been seeking without even knowing it. I wanted nothing more than to remain in this realm forever, basking in the presence of divine love that asked nothing of me except to receive it. But Jesus looked at me with an expression that mixed infinite compassion with gentle determination. His scarred hands reached toward my face, and I felt power flowing into me that was unlike any earthly sensation I had ever known. It was as if divine energy itself was being transferred into my spiritual being, filling me with strength and purpose that I recognized came directly from heaven. Ahmed, my beloved son, he said with authority that shook the foundations of eternity. It is not yet your time to stay here. You have important work to do, and I am sending you back to complete it. The joy I had been feeling suddenly mixed with deep concern as I realized what he was telling me. The paradise I was experiencing, this perfect love and acceptance, this freedom from all the confusion and pain of earthly existence, was about to be taken away. But Lord, I pleaded, my voice heavy with the weight of leaving such perfect peace, I don't want to go back to that world of violence and hatred. Here, there is no suffering, no fear, no confusion about who you really are. How can I return to a place where so few people understand the truth I've discovered? Jesus placed both of his hands over my heart, and I felt an even more intense surge of divine energy flowing through my entire being. It was like lightning and warmth combining within my soul, filling me with supernatural strength that I knew would sustain me through whatever challenges lay ahead. You must go back and tell them who I am, Ahmed, he said with unwavering love and determination. Tell Muslims that I love them beyond measure, that I am not just a prophet, but the Son of God who died for their sins. Tell Christians about my heart for Muslim people, how much the Father loves those who have been worshipping him through Islam, even with incomplete understanding. The mission he was giving me suddenly became crystal clear, and I understood the enormous cost it would involve. To return to Iraq and tell other Muslims that I had encountered Jesus personally, that he was indeed the Son of God, that salvation came through him alone rather than through Islamic observance, would mean losing everything that defined my identity and place in the world. My family will reject me completely, I said, my heart breaking at the thought of the pain this would cause my father. They will think I've lost my mind or been corrupted by Christian propaganda. The community that has known and respected our family for generations will view my conversion as the ultimate betrayal of everything we stand for. Jesus nodded with understanding that showed he knew exactly what this obedience would require of me. The price will be very high, Ahmed. Your father will grieve as if you had died in that fire. Your community will persecute you and threaten your life for leaving Islam. Some will say that your near-death experience was deception from Satan, designed to lead you away from the true faith. The thought of causing such anguish to my father, who had invested his entire life in Islamic scholarship and service, filled me with sorrow that was almost unbearable. He had been my mentor, my guide in religious matters, and the person I respected most in the world. To tell him that everything we had believed together was incomplete would shatter his heart and potentially destroy our relationship forever. But you will gain something far more valuable than what you lose, Jesus continued, reading the struggle that was raging in my heart. You will have the absolute certainty of eternal life with me, and you will have the joy of helping others find the truth that sets them free. Some will reject your testimony and persecute you for it, but others will recognize my voice speaking through your words. Their salvation will bring you more happiness than any earthly comfort could provide. He gestured around us at the realm of perfect light and love that surrounded us. This is not just your destination, Ahmed. This is the destination I desire for every person you will meet when you return to earth. Every Muslim who is questioning why God allowed their suffering. Every Christian who has built walls of prejudice against Muslim people. Every person searching for truth in a world full of religious confusion and hatred. I want them all to know that my love is stronger than theological differences. As Jesus continued speaking, I felt my resistance to his mission gradually dissolving. The love I had experienced in his presence was too overwhelming and transformative to keep to myself. If there were others who could discover this same peace, this same acceptance, this same freedom from the burden of trying to earn God's approval through religious performance, how could I remain silent about it? I will give you supernatural strength for what is coming, Jesus promised, his voice filling me with confidence that transcended my human fears. When you face rejection from your family, I will comfort you with my presence. When the community turns against you and threatens your life, I will provide new relationships with people who become your spiritual family. When you lose your place in society because of your testimony, I will open new doors for provision and ministry. And when you feel afraid or discouraged by the opposition you face, you will remember this moment and know that I am with you always. The light around Jesus began to intensify until it became almost blinding in its brilliance. I felt myself being pulled backward, away from his physical presence, away from the paradise I had briefly glimpsed. The sensation was like being caught in a powerful current that I could not resist, drawing me back through the spiritual realm toward the physical world I had left behind. Remember everything you have seen and experienced here, Jesus called to me as the distance between us increased. Remember my love for you and share that love with everyone who will listen. Tell them that the truth is not a religion to follow, but a person to know, and that person is me. Tell them that I died for every Muslim, every Christian, every person who has ever lived, and that my arms are open to welcome anyone who comes to me. The journey back seemed to happen both instantaneously and over an eternity. I was rushing through dimensions of existence that human language cannot adequately describe, carrying with me the memory of divine love that remained crystal clear in every detail. The encounter with Jesus, his teachings about salvation by grace rather than religious works, the understanding of his true identity as the Son of God, none of it faded like a dream or hallucination would have. Instead, these experiences felt more real and substantial than any earthly memory I possessed. As I approached the boundary between the spiritual and physical realms, I could sense my consciousness preparing to re-enter the burned and broken body that was lying in a morgue in Mosul. Then, with a violence that shocked every system in my being, I slammed back into my physical form. The transition from the glory and perfection of heaven to the limitations and pain of damaged flesh was jarring beyond description. My eyes flew open, and I gasped for air, with a sound so loud and desperate that it startled the morgue attendant who was preparing my body for burial. The man dropped the instruments he had been holding and began shouting for medical assistance. Within minutes, doctors and nurses were rushing into the morgue, their faces showing complete bewilderment at finding a patient who had been declared dead hours earlier, now breathing and responsive. "This is medically impossible," I heard one doctor tell another as they worked to assess my condition. "He was burned over 60% of his body. His heart stopped completely. We documented brain death. There should be massive organ failure, but his vital signs are stabilizing." As they transferred me back to the intensive care unit, I remained silent about what I had experienced, knowing that no one would believe such an incredible account. But the memory of my encounter with Jesus burned in my heart more intensely than the flames that had consumed my body, and I knew that my life would never be the same. The medical team kept me in intensive care for 3 weeks, marveling at my recovery rate and struggling to explain how someone with such severe burns could not only survive but heal at an unprecedented pace. The doctors expected massive infection, organ failure, and permanent disfigurement, yet my body was regenerating tissue and healing wounds in ways that defied their medical training and experience. During those long days in the hospital, I spent every quiet moment processing the magnitude of what had happened to me during those 9 minutes of death. The encounter with Jesus remained vivid and unchanged in my memory, more real than the white walls and beeping machines around me. Every detail of our conversation, every moment of overwhelming love I had experienced, every vision of heaven's glory stayed crystal clear in my mind. When my father finally arrived at the hospital, after hearing about my miraculous survival, I saw in his eyes a mixture of relief, confusion, and deep concern. The man who had been declared dead after being burnt alive by ISIS was now sitting up in bed, alert and responsive. According to Islamic understanding, this could only be a sign of Allah's special favor, Yet something in my demeanor told him that more had changed than just my physical condition. "The whole mosque has been praying for your recovery," he told me as he sat beside my hospital bed. "The Imam says this proves that Allah has special plans for your life. Everyone is calling it a miracle and praising Allah for preserving you when the enemies of Islam tried to destroy you. If only he knew who had actually performed the miracle and what those plans really involved." For several days, I wrestled with how and when to share the truth about my experience with him. I knew that this conversation would either destroy our relationship or transform it completely, and there would be no middle ground between those outcomes. During my recovery, I secretly asked one of the hospital staff to bring me an Arabic Bible, claiming I wanted to understand the beliefs of the Christians I had helped, to better appreciate why they had been willing to die for their faith. Reading the New Testament with my new understanding was like discovering a completely different book than the corrupted text I had been taught to dismiss. The words of Jesus recorded in the Gospels match perfectly with the character of the man I had encountered during my death experience. His teachings about love, forgiveness, and salvation by grace resonated with everything I had learned in that spiritual realm. For the first time in my life, I understood why Christians called him Lord and Savior rather than simply a prophet. After 2 weeks of internal struggle, I could no longer keep my transformation hidden from my father. I chose a quiet evening when we were alone in my hospital room, and I looked into his kind, aging eyes that had guided me through every important decision of my life up to this point. "Father," I began, my voice trembling with emotion, "I need to tell you what really happened when I died in that fire. Something that will be difficult for you to hear, but that I cannot keep hidden any longer." He leaned forward, giving me his complete attention, probably expecting me to describe some detail about the pain or my memories of the execution. Instead, I told him everything: my death, my journey through spiritual darkness, my encounter with Jesus Christ, his revelation about salvation, and the mission he had given me to share this truth with others. As I spoke, I watched my father's face transform from curiosity to confusion, then to horror and profound grief. When I finished my account, he sat in stunned silence for several minutes, tears flowing down his cheeks as the implications of what I was saying became clear to him. "This cannot be real, my son," he whispered through his tears. "You have suffered terrible trauma. The burns, the pain, the psychological shock, they have affected your mind. Jesus was only a prophet, nothing more. You know this. I taught you this from the Quran since you were a child." The conversation continued for hours, with my father pleading, arguing, and desperately trying to convince me that I had been deceived by hallucinations brought on by oxygen deprivation or psychological trauma. He reminded me of our family's religious heritage, the respect our community had for our Islamic scholarship, and the catastrophic consequences that would follow if word of my conversion spread throughout Mosul. But I could not compromise on what I had experienced personally. No amount of theological arguments could erase the memory of standing before Jesus and feeling his perfect love wash over my soul. No religious reasoning could diminish the reality of the paradise I had glimpsed or the peace I had found in his presence. Over the following weeks, as I gradually shared my testimony with family members and close friends, our carefully built life in Mosul began to unravel completely. Religious leaders came to visit me, hoping to convince me that Satan had deceived me during my near-death experience. They used every Quranic verse and hadith they could remember to prove that my testimony contradicted fundamental Islamic teaching. The crisis reached its climax when the local imam and several community elders summoned me to a formal meeting. They offered me one final opportunity to recant my testimony and return to Orthodox Islamic belief, explaining that they understood the trauma I had endured, might have temporarily confused my thinking. When I quietly but firmly refused, explaining that I could not and would not deny what I had experienced personally with Jesus Christ, they declared me an apostate and issued warnings for all Muslims to avoid contact with me. Within days, I became a pariah in the city where my family had been respected for generations. The persecution escalated quickly beyond social ostracism. Someone threw stones at my father's house, breaking windows and leaving threatening messages about harboring an apostate. My father received warnings that his position at the mosque would be terminated if he continued to support me. Former friends began crossing the street to avoid speaking with our family, and shopkeepers refused to serve us. The final blow came when ISIS sympathizers in the city issued a death warrant against me, declaring that my survival and subsequent apostasy proved I was protected by Satan for the purpose of leading other Muslims astray. They announced that killing me would be considered a holy act that would earn the perpetrator favor with Allah. That night, my father came to me with tears in his eyes and pain etched deeply into his face. "You must leave Iraq immediately," he said. "There are people who will kill you, and I cannot protect you from them. If you stay here, you will die, and this time there will be no miraculous resurrection." Leaving my homeland and my family was the most painful experience of my life. Yet underneath the grief, I felt a supernatural peace that could only come from heaven. I had lost my country, my community, my family relationships, and nearly everything that had defined my earthly identity. But I had gained the certainty of God's love that could never be taken away from me. Through an underground network of Christian organizations that help persecuted religious minorities, I was able to flee first to Jordan and eventually to a Western country that granted me asylum. The journey was dangerous and difficult, but I carried with me the promise Jesus had made that He would provide for my needs and give me strength for whatever challenges lay ahead. Several months after my arrival in my new country, I was baptized in a small church by a pastor who wept as he heard my complete testimony. The congregation, which included several other former Muslims who had come to faith through dreams, visions, or persecution, welcomed me as a brother and helped me begin building a new life founded on the truth I had discovered. My new mission became sharing my testimony with anyone who would listen, whether Muslim or Christian. Despite the constant danger that extremists might target me for assassination, I found opportunities to tell individuals and groups about my encounter with Jesus, always emphasizing that God's love transcends religious boundaries and that His arms are open to welcome anyone who comes to Him. Over the years, I have had the incredible privilege of seeing other former Muslims come to faith in Christ after hearing my story. Each conversion has filled my heart with the same joy I witnessed in heaven, knowing that another soul has discovered the truth that sets us free from the burden of trying to earn salvation through religious performance. They tried to silence me with death, but Jesus gave me a new voice to proclaim His love. I was burned by men who thought they were serving God, but I was saved by the God who loves even those who hate Him. Every scar on my body is a reminder of the fire that once consumed me and the grace that brought me back to life. Now ask yourself this question: if today were your last breath, who would you meet? Would you face fear, or would you face love? I thought dying for Allah was the highest honor a Muslim could achieve, but I learned that living for Jesus is true life. When my time truly comes, I know exactly where I'll run, straight into the arms of the one who pulled me out of the fire and showed me that His love has no boundaries. Fire revealed truth, and His name is Jesus.